Welcome, Gottfried Zimmermann.
Thank you for having me here. So thank you for inviting me to this conference. I'm a professor of media informatics in Stuttgart at the Stuttgart Media University, and I'm focused on teaching and research and standardization on usability and digital accessibility. I've been 13 years in Stuttgart Media University, and I'm also director of the Accessibility Competence Center at Stuttgart Media University. And I work, among other groups, I work with the joint working group that develops the European norm 301549, which is the standard that is actually prescribed to be conforming to in context of the European Accessibility Act. So I understand, oh, sorry, I need to move the slides forward, yeah. So I understand that you have come to this event to get more, to know more about the European Accessibility Act and how it affects self-service terminals. So I'm gonna give you a glimpse of what's coming up in the new standard revision. And I've actually looked into the standard. I also worked with vendors of self-service terminals. And if you go through the criteria in that standards, so there are about 200 criteria listed, more than 200 actually, then among them, there are 128 criteria that apply to self-service terminals. So I don't have the time, and we don't have the time to go through all of them now. So I'm going to focus on a summary that I've made for you. I call them the 12 rules for self-service terminals. So I basically cluster the criteria that are very likely to be part of the UEN and will try to convey their meaning and talk to you in terms of 12 rules. If you have the slides, I can actually, if you want the slides, I will share them with you. I know Per has also a copy of them. So if you look at the notes section of the slides, then you see for every rule that I will now present to you, which criteria are mapped to this rule. So in total, 128 criteria, now summarized as 12 rules. I'm going to go through the rules one by one. So first rule is provide non-visual access. So that means since a self-service terminal is what we call a closed system, that means it is close to the user in terms of you cannot install assistive technology. There's no way to install a screen reader. You cannot just come up and plug your keyboard in. It's not possible, maybe for some of them, but mostly not. And it would also be a security risk. So we need to make these systems accessible on their own without the use of assistive technologies. Now, what's allowed is earphones. So if we have persons that do not see or have a vision impairment, they need to get non-visual access to this self-service terminal. So that means that all text that's presented on the self-service terminal must be voiced. We call that self-voicing. So you tap on a text and it will read it to you. Or you can use special keys and then the text is read to you that's presented on the screen. And the second rule, I will introduce how these keys could work. Then also if we have graphical content, pictures, diagrams, photos, or any kind of graphics, we need to provide a textual alternative for them. On the web, we call it alt text or alternate text. And it's basically a narration, so that if you listen to it, you know what's being presented. And then if we have videos on the self-service terminals, for example, if you have a terminal for check-in at the airport, you may have a video explaining how to put your passport on the scanning area. So then if things are shown on the video that are really important, you need to provide an audio description to that, telling what's happening on the screen for those who cannot see the screen or can hardly see the screen. And also what's required is a standard connection for headphones, could be either USB or the 3.5 millimeter jacks. The other thing is that if you have self-voicing information, the user needs to be able to switch it on and off, and also to control the volume and other characteristics of the speech output. And we need tactile markers, 4 keys that are part of the self-service terminal. So may it be hardware keys now or other authorizable parts. Also, if it's like a ticket machine where you get a ticket as an output, a printed one that you can hold, then if that ticket needs to be put on a scanner in a certain way, in a certain orientation, it needs to have tactile markers so that a user who cannot see can still realize how to use it and in which position to put it on a scanner, for example. So this is the first rule for people who cannot see or can hardly see. And the second rule is support key only control. So now there are users who cannot use the touch screen. So nowadays, most self-service terminals have touch screens, but some users cannot use them, either because they cannot see or because they cannot use their hands, or they have gloves in some way that they cannot take off. So there must be a way that the whole system can be controlled and operated without using the touch screen or without tapping it. And I'm showing you here an image of an external keyboard that you can attach to a self-service terminal. And this is one example how you can do this. It's based on the Trace Easy Access approach, which is over 20 years old, but it still works and is being used in the United States on many self-service terminals. And Storm Interface provides actually a product for that. But there may be others. This is just one example. What's happening if you press the back and the next button, then your focus is going forward or backwards, like in the web browser, like using the tab button, tabulator, or shift tab for back. And then you have a select button, that's the green one, and also a headphone jack and a few extra buttons. But with that alone, you can actually operate the whole self-service terminal. And you can make transactions, whatever you want. And you can use it either by listening to what's being self-voiced to you, or by looking at the screen, or both. So this key-only control also needs to work with self-voicing if the user wants that. And if you tap through the elements, they must be in a meaningful order, so that basically the user is taken through the form or through the information one by one in the right order. Third rule is provide non-auditory and non-speech access. So there are people who cannot hear or can hardly hear, and also some that cannot speak. And oftentimes it actually occurs together. People who don't hear have sometimes not a typical speech, and it's hard to understand them. So we need to cater for both, for those who cannot hear and those who cannot speak, or both. So the self-service terminal needs to display sounds and speech output on screen. So if you have sounds or speech output, then you need to kind of display them as a bubble or as subtitles or whatever on screen. And if you have controls that beep, like caps lock, if you tap on caps lock, it beeps. Somebody who cannot hear doesn't realize they have accidentally touched caps lock. So you need to provide a visual indicator in that case. And you need to provide alternatives to voice and video-based services. So for example, if you have a system where you can, these telephone menus, interactive voice response, where you listen to the text and it says, press 1 for this, press 2 for that, and so on. If that's part of your self-service terminal, then you need to provide an alternative for that for people who cannot hear. And you need to provide captions for videos, and it must be easy to turn captions on and off. They must be basically on the first layer of controls, on the same level as the pause and stop and start buttons are. And if you have speech output, speech input, so if you require the user to talk, then there must be an alternative for that. For example, typing. And for audio conversations like conference calls, you need to provide a real-time text chat. That means a chat that instantly transmits the characters one by one, not waiting until you press enter. And you also need to provide video as an alternative channel for those who want to sign in sign language. Fourth rule is do not require complex manual actions. So this is about using hands to operate things. So some people cannot use two hands for operation, so you need to provide an alternative. Also, if something needs grasping, pinching, or twisting of the wrist, then there needs to be an alternative for that, because some people can't do that. And if you have a mechanical part on your self-service terminal, then that needs to be operable with low force only. There is some threshold given. Fifth rule, make navigation and orientation easy. So this is all about finding your way on a touch screen or finding the right buttons to operate and make your transaction or whatever you want on your self-service terminal. So first step is, if you are in need as a user, if you need some accessibility features, they need to be easy to switch on. So don't make a button that will actually make a stark contrast. So if you have a button that will switch to high contrast mode, don't make that in a low contrast, because then those people who need it will not find it. It's like building steps in front of an elevator. That doesn't work for wheelchair users. The same needs to happen in digital accessibility. And if you have hover effects, so some self-service terminals have a pointing device installed, like a trackball or so. And then if you use that trackball to hover over content, like a mouse, then don't make that hover mode so that a mega menu opens and everything else is basically covered, and users don't see how to get rid of that menu anymore. Also provide telling links, link texts. So if a user presses on a link, they know where they're going to go to. Also, headings and labels need to be telling. And if you have links and buttons with the same functionality multiple times, then they must have always the same shape and the same appearance. They must be consistent. The sixth rule is consider colors and text design. And this is largely the same as on the web. So you need to, but one rule is different or additional. That's on the text size. So on a closed system, there is no way to enlarge text size. So then you need to display the text in a large size right from start. And there are some thresholds. They must have a minimal height, these fonts, a minimal size, depending on the typical viewing distance. Also, the text needs to be readable from a range, from a variety of heights. So some people sit like in a wheelchair, then they need to be able to look up at the screen and still be able to read it. The angle must be okay to still be able to read the text. And some people are standing there and are tall, and also they need to be able to read the text. And then things that we know from the web, use color redundantly, and that applies to the screen and to physical controls like physical buttons on the device. Provide sufficient color contrasts and do not require scrolling in two directions. So no user should scroll horizontally and vertically at the same time. That's too demanding. The seventh rule is avoid animations, distractions, flickering, timeouts, and interruptions. And again, that's the same as on the web. You need to make your audio and videos stoppable. Don't just have them run from the beginning. Let the user stop audio and video. And that's also important if you have if the user wants to be in the self-voicing mode. Also make timeouts adjustable, so or extensible. So if you're like on a ticket machine, and then of course, if nothing happens for a while, the system will basically reset and go back to the beginning, but provide an option to extend the time of the timeout or to say, no, I'm still here, please continue. And then there is always a risk of people getting seizures, those that are actually prone to photosensitive epilepsy. And therefore, we need to avoid flickering more than 3 times in a second. In many cases, for self-service terminals, users need to provide input. They need to input their name, their address, or pins, and so on. And it's important that if you have any form input, that the labels are clear and the instructions are clear, that we help the user to prevent input errors, to avoid them. So we give clear instructions, we give hints what a correct input would be. But if the user actually does make an error, then we try to help them to recover and give them choices in which way to recover and try to find something that maybe the user wanted to input, but they couldn't spell it right or so. So we can provide suggestions for solution of the error. And that's new in WCAG 2.2, in the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.2. If a user needs to resume the form filling, start again, then the machine needs to provide the same information again that the user has already entered. The ninth rule is make touchscreen input easy. So on self-service terminals, usually we have a touchscreen and there are some specifics. So oftentimes we have on-screen keyboards displayed on the touchscreen, and then people are using it to input text. But some people will not be able to use that keyboard in a regular way due to dexterity issues. So if their fingers tremble or hands tremble or other things. So what applies to physical keyboards like repeat rate or bounce rate or sticky keys, these things need to be applied to on-screen keyboards as well. And we should not require two hands for operation. That applies for the sticky key mode. We should not require complex gestures, and complex gestures are all gestures that are more than just a single finger tapping. So if you have a finger dragging, or if you have multiple fingers, then that's already a complex gesture. Also, we need to make our link targets big enough to cater for the fat finger problem. And that's something special here. I didn't really know on which rule to put it, but I think the best match is here. Do not rely on one biometric method alone. So sometimes we use biometrics to identify persons. Examples are fingerprint, iris, voice, face ID. And if we use one of them, then we need at least provide another method of identification, and it could be also another biometric method by law. Um, 10, support bidirectional communication by text, audio, and video. So now we talk about video conferencing, and the principle behind that is total communication. That means you need to have a voice channel, a real-time text channel, and a video channel on equal basis, meaning that a person, whatever channel they use, can basically participate in a conversation, can basically raise their hands on any of these channels, and then everything can be pulled together as one conversation. The audio needs to have sufficient quality, also the video sufficient quality for sign language, and we need speaker identification if somebody talks, for those who talk, but also those who sign and those who type text. The 11th rule is consider support documentations and generated content. So if we have a self-service terminal, then we deliver it to our customer. And first of all, there need to be installation instructions that tell those who mount and just install that device, tell them what needs to be done to make it accessible also from the surroundings in the built environment. We need to provide documentation about that device in an accessible way, also describe the accessibility features. And if we have support services, hotlines, and so they should know about the accessibility features of that self-service terminal. And the hotlines and support services should be available through a variety of communication channels. For example, not only telephone alone, but also through a chat, because customers who cannot hear may not be able to use the telephone. And now the last rule, and I'm running out of time, I realized, that's specific for self-service terminals. So the EN 301549 has a specific subchapter on the physical access for wheelchair users. So wheelchair users must be able to use the self-service terminal either in the forward approach, and that's the left picture where somebody needs to just drive up to the self-service terminal, and then there needs to be some leg space underneath and knee space and also toe space, so they don't bump their toes against the device, and then still are able to see the monitor and reach out for tapping the touch screen. Or they come from the parallel approach, the side approach, where they need to operate this everything basically from the side, which is not ideal, but sometimes it can be made possible by that. Now, there are some mandatory limits, minimum and maximum, heights of operable parts. And these are based on the old measures are ADA, American with Disabilities Act. But now the new standard seems to be going towards the stricter measures of ISO 21542. But it's not clear yet because we don't have the final version yet which measures will prevail. But I would advise that you look at the measures of ISO 21542 because in the future, at some point, we'll probably go towards them. And my conclusion is we are working on the further development of EN 301549. It's going to be version 4.1.1. And the target date of the final publication is kind of probably beginning of 2026, but it will take some time until it's harmonized with the European Accessibility Act. So it will happen probably in the course of 2026. Until then, you can already prepare yourselves and your products. If you just look at the old EN 301549 version 3.2.1, most of what's coming up is already in there. And you can look at the physical measures in ISO 21542. And you can already start with making audits and making your self-service terminals accessible and document that in a conformance assessment. That's going to be needed later when the European Accessibility Act is active. So thank you for the attention.
Thank you for a very hands-on presentation. I think it will be very useful for our audience today. So vielen Dank und auf Wiedersehen.